We've got a wonderful and packed program today. A little bit of annual meeting business and a lot of great program for you, including hearing from two of our award-winning champions. The awards will be presented this evening, of course, but we have two of them here at the luncheon, the annual meeting and luncheon, to address us. So you may know I'm Mary Woolley. I'm the CEO of Research America. Delighted to be here today, and I want to just start off promptly by introducing the chair of our board, Governor Mike Castle.
Thank you very much, Mary, for your kind words of introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. I am delighted to be with you. I am not one of the distinguished people she spoke about, but I am still pleased to join you and to participate in this afternoon's activities. As the chair of the board of Research America, I am pleased to welcome the members of Research America to this 30th annual meeting of members. On behalf of the board of directors and staff, thank you for being with us. And I might say at this point that our staff is really the glue that holds all this together. They do a wonderful job. I hope you get a chance to speak to them if you haven't met them already. Not just Mary, she does a great job too, but all of the staff does a fantastic job. I now call the meeting to order. Not that you're out of order, but that's what the instructions here say. And I am pleased to report that our membership today includes 421 organizations that span the continuum of discovery to development to delivery. Many members are represented in the room, and more are joining us by live stream. Thank you for your membership and support. Research America's Board of Directors recently conducted a thoughtful assessment of our mission statement to make sure that it clearly communicates our steadfast commitment to achieving better health through advocacy for resources and policies that support scientific discovery and spur innovation. And you have I think a document at your table that shows some of this as well. This exercise resulted in the board approving a new mission statement that holds true to our rich history of bold advocacy and guides our future. Our mission statement is now: the Research America Alliance advocates for science, discovery, and innovation to achieve better health for all. Advocacy is at the heart of our mission. Advocacy makes a difference. We are your partners in advocacy. In a few minutes, our president, Mary Woolley, will share highlights of Research America's accomplishments over the past year and talk briefly about priorities for this year. But first, it is an honor for me to introduce Research America's Chair Emeritus and Chair of the Nominating Committee, and I think if we ever took a vote on it, the most outstanding member of our trustees group, John Porter, for the report from the Nominating Committee. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the Nominating Committee, I'm pleased to present the following slate of directors to serve on Research America's Board of Directors. Nominations for re-election to directors for a 3-year term are as follows: Tenley E. Albright, MD, Georges C. Benjamin, MD, Victor Zhao, MD, William Haight, MD, PhD, Martha Hill, PhD, RN, Rush Holt, PhD, James Madeira, MD, Mark McCullen, MD, PhD, MPA, Herb Partis, MD, John Porter. I have a degree, actually. It's John Porter, JD, Amy Comstock Rick, JD, and Larry Shapiro, MD. I move for the approval of the slate. Yeah, take a vote.
There's been a motion to approve the slate that Mr. Porter has put forward. Is there any further discussion? There's not a lot of time for discussion on some of these things today, but with that, let's take a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing no opposition, the slate is approved as is called for by Mr. Porter. And now I invite Mary to return to the stage here.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to all of our board members, those recently re-elected and those who continue to serve. It's an honor and a pleasure to work with you. For those who don't know many of our board members, let me just say that they work hard, they are full of ideas, and they never say no. They never say no to helping us accomplish our mission. So congratulations on your new terms. So I'm going to just show you a few, in pretty rapid order, a few highlights of the last year of 2018. So the first thing to say is that Research America, in fact, doesn't accomplish anything all by ourselves. Not only are we an alliance of 420 plus institutions, patient groups, industry, and scientific societies all working together, but there are, as many, if not all of you know, many other alliances working on issues that we work on day in, day out. And it's critically important to have the skills and the commitment to do that work together so that we're speaking with one voice. We're not accidentally or hopefully never on purpose contradicting one another as we make the case to members of Congress, to the public, via the media and otherwise. So we saw some terrific successes last year, and you may remember if you were at our annual awards event last March that Nancy Pelosi, not Speaker again at the time, but Congresswoman Pelosi, spoke from the stage about how there would be a $3 billion increase to the NIH for fiscal 18. There had been a long delay, continuing resolution, et cetera, on getting that wrapped up. And that was startling. I think it greatly exceeded what most people thought was going to happen. And we were just thrilled that that was announced at a Research America event. I'm happy to say that she's going to be with us again tonight. So maybe we'll have another great announcement. There was also a $2 billion increase for fiscal 19. Now, NIH is not by any means the only agency that we work in support of day in and day out. The other federal health agencies, to be sure, they haven't all had the robust increases in their budgets that we think they deserve, but we are working away on that. And we are working on empowering young people in particular, young scientists, but all scientists, to become effective as advocates, to make the case wherever they are, not only when they visit Washington, but at home in their district. And that is, this is an extremely exciting time to be working on that charge because there's been a surge in interest from young scientists. And it's exciting to be part of that. We were able to do a micro grant program last year that helped 10 groups of young scientists put in place their own ideas on how to make a more effective case for research in their communities. Some other things we did included bipartisan outreach in every congressional race to convey the strategic importance of R&D. We've always worked in election years and election cycles to embed the importance of science. And again, we worked with others in that activity. We did a lot with the media of all kinds. We did an advertising campaign called Raise the Caps. We did part of that in 2017 and then into 2018 because it took a long time to accomplish a temporary end to sequestration. And we're going to do that again. We're getting ready to launch that next week because sequestration is back, unfortunately. But we have many partners in that work and are really excited about the fact that it shows that the science enterprise is at the table when it comes to talking about priorities for federal funding. It isn't something that's an afterthought or a never thought about. It's right there. It's in the mix, along with all the other activities and issues that are spoken for in a budget process. So we continue to commission public opinion surveys regularly. You have in your handouts at your seats today our brand new survey booklet. It contains just a small amount of the survey work that we've done over this past year, but we hope it gives you a little flavor for how much there is. And we have some really pretty exciting findings this year, including that the public would like to see science put to work, if you will, influencing public policy across a very broad range of science issues. My colleagues, and less so I, but my colleagues and many members of our board have spent a substantial amount of time on Capitol Hill this past year, meeting with members, sometimes with staff, sometimes with our members. And that is essential to nurturing strong relationships with people who are our current champions or whom we believe we can develop as champions. Oh, here's the Raise the Budget Caps advertisement. It's very attention-getting. It's not one you're going to see in other parts of the country. It is intended to be inside the Beltway, some in print, mostly on social media. But we got a lot of good feedback on it last year and decided to stick with the image and the message. So I mentioned that we did a micro grant bipartisan civic engagement program last year. We had a report out on that after the November election in conjunction with a program where we spoke about some of our former members of Congress who serve on our board, spoke about what the impact and implications of the election would have on science. So following that panel discussion, we heard from a wonderful scientist, young scientist, who talked enthusiastically about being engaged in making the case for science in her community. And you can see here where those activities took place all around the country. We had got a lot of nice media coverage over the past year in a variety of publications. You can see some greatest hits here. We're proud of that. We have a superb communications effort, so important to being heard and making one's case. And we attracted 31 new members to the Research America Alliance. And you can see some of the names here by logo and more here We're just thrilled. If anybody's from these new members in particular in the room or through the live cast, thank you especially for joining us this past year. You make us stronger, and we believe that we can help you accomplish your mission. So, looking forward to the rest of 2019, I realize we're almost a quarter of the way into it. I mentioned already that we're working hard on raising the budget caps, and we have wonderful allies in doing so. And we want to grow federal funding across the spectrum of health-focused research and science writ large. We can't leave out the rest of science. We're going to be fighting for a policy climate where public and private enterprises have every chance to realize their goals. And we will be talking much more than we ever have, because it's true, much more than it ever has been, about the threat to America's global leadership in R&D. That'll be a big topic, a theme all through this year. I mentioned one publication that we're releasing today, and that's to your left here on the slide, the America Speaks publication of just highlights from several public opinion surveys we commissioned last year. I want to thank the American Medical Association for making that project possible. Again, they've done this for many years. We also have our annual report, chock full of information about what we were up to in the last year, and it might be of considerable interest as well. Tonight, and I mentioned our program tonight briefly, tonight will be our 23rd annual Advocacy Awards dinner. Very exciting. We've grown this event enormously over 23 years, had to move its location several times. And tonight we'll be at the Mellon Auditorium and hope to see most, if not all of you there. These are our honorees this year, and we think it's a splendid group of people who I can tell you, as listening in on the awards committee deliberations, these are hotly contended spots. It's not easy to win the selection. If you can think of, it's always worth thinking, if you can think of people that you believe ought to be honored next year, it's not too soon to be thinking about nominating them. We'll open the nominations next month, but that's just right around the corner. So we're pretty excited about this. And then I want to thank the sponsors of our awards program tonight that you can read here, especially Johnson & Johnson Innovation, which is our corporate host, and Pfizer for bringing a team of young innovators, which is so important, knowing that they're eager to have young scientists be in the room, see what's going on at the level of advocacy and science leadership, and be part of it. And this is the rest of our sponsors tonight, and we thank you all. I want to take a moment for a special thanks to my staff colleagues at Research America. We're a pretty small organization, and many people on staff actually function in more than one area. And they're a fabulous team. They worked hard on this event and on the event tonight, but the truth is they work hard all the time and with a smile. So I thank you all and hope you will join me in applauding them. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to our chair, Mike Castle.
Thank you, Mary. We appreciate your continuing great work and leadership. Now I am pleased and honored to introduce a very special guest to all of you. Admiral Brett Giroir is the Assistant Secretary for Health at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. He was sworn in just over a year ago to lead the development of HHS public health policy recommendations. He oversees 11 core public health offices, including the Office of the Surgeon General and the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps, which has approximately 6,500 uniformed health officers. Dr. Giroir is a physician scientist and medical school leader. He served as Vice Chancellor of the Texas A&M University System and CEO of Texas A&M's Health Science Center. Dr. Giroir previously served the nation as Director of the Defense Sciences Office of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA. A more complete bio of his remarkable career is found in the program. And as I get ready to call him up, I'd just like to say, in listening to the nominations of people for the board, or renominations, I should say, I listened carefully, and a number of them were doctors and PhDs or whatever. People like John Porter and I basically have law degrees, and I think it used to be an LLB or something like that. At some point, they decided to make it a Juris Doctor, so we can call ourselves doctors too, I suppose. Other than that, I know nothing about medicine and working with Research America. Doctor?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and joining you this evening as well. Last year, actually, the dinner and awards ceremony was one of my first events, actually, that I did after. Hi, I've got lots of good friends here. Okay, good. I see lots of friends in the audience. So I do appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think when we look back from a public health perspective, this is the life expectancy in the United States between 1900 and 2015. And as you see, aside from the pandemic influenza in 1918, this is a remarkable story of increased life expectancy and improved quality of life. This didn't happen by itself, it happened because of research. The great triumphs, which we're still battling though, influenza, pneumonia, enteric diseases, stroke, cardiovascular disease, tuberculosis, cancer, and accidents and trauma, are primarily responsible for this tremendous increase. And again, I don't need to tell you, and I borrowed this from the NIH because I love this diagram. We got here because of research, and the only way we're going to move forward is to have a staunch commitment to research across all domains. I'm a research guy, right? I was a medical school faculty member. I was funded by a number of organizations. I'm an NIH researcher, starting from a scientist training program and postdoctoral fellowship grants. I ran the DARPA Science Office, the first physician to do that. So I am a research guy, and I understand this. I had a basic science laboratory, I did clinical research, and now I'm in the public health space. And I do want to emphasize here what I love about this diagram, so many things, is number one, the patient has to be at the center of everything we do, whether we start in the laboratory or whether we're doing public health research, and that everything works together. This is not linear. Basic research could lead to clinical implementation of something else across the board. It's not necessarily following that circle. So I am certainly committed to this and understand the importance, and I feel like I'm around my peeps when I'm in this room. So what do I worry about, and what things are we going to have to apply our research talents to? So I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk a little bit about opioids because I am the opioids guy at HHS. A little bit about our new initiative in HIV, which was announced by the president, and why we can only do that because of the research that has gone before it. And Dr. Gibbons knows I got to end with sickle cell because he knows how we both feel about that. U.S. healthcare spending, our latest projections up to $6 trillion and 19% of the GNP by 2027. This is probably not sustainable. This is chronic illnesses primarily, things that we need to get a hold of, how to prevent the onset of renal disease, how to prevent the complications of hypertension, how to prevent the complications of diabetes, strokes, cardiovascular disease, et cetera, and the looming paradigm of neurodegeneration that we need an absolute new paradigm on which to attack. But despite the money we spend, that inexorable rise in health life expectancy we saw is not inexorable. In fact, in 2015 and 2017, we saw decreases in life expectancy for Americans in those 2 years, which gives us the realistic possibility that I don't want to face, that our children will live shorter, less quality lives than we have. And if we don't change this trajectory, that is what's on the horizon. I look at sexually transmitted infections as sort of a bellwether, a harbinger of things. We had 2.3 million sexually transmitted infections in 2017. That is a failure across the board of our public health system, of our educational system, of our outreach system. These are not simple infections. This is leading to congenital syphilis. It's leading to losses in fertility. And now the links between sexually transmitted infections accounting for an increased incidence in HIV and also increased incidence in cancer, like ovarian cancer later in life. This is a tremendous problem. We still suffer from infectious diseases. 80,000 people died of influenza last year, kind of a remarkable number. We have emerging infectious diseases, over 900 cases of Ebola in Congo right now in the DRC, and that number is going to continue to grow because of the unrest and the all-out conflict. And I do worry about rogue states and organizations. We have to think about research in the chem, bio, rad, nuke space as well, because that's the world we live in. I am the opioid guy, and I think we all know about the opioid and substance use crisis within our country. Just looking at opioids, 11.4 million people misused opioids last year, and 2.1 million people had the disorder. They were addicted to opioids. 53% got their pain reliever from a friend, 36% from a healthcare provider, and very important, and I'm foreshadowing, the main reason for opioid misuse is pain. If we don't solve the pain crisis in the United States with new approaches, new research, from basic mechanisms and new targets to how do we deliver and implement, we will never solve the opioid crisis. These has to be hand in hand, and I'm so pleased that the NIH has taken that approach. We had something got cut off, but over 70,000 drug overdose deaths in 2017, the majority of which were from opioids, and the majority of those from a very potent opioid called fentanyl. Highlighting research areas, I'm a pediatric critical care physician. I am shocked by the number of children with neonatal abstinence syndrome, and this is really just talking about opioids. There's a growing amount now with methamphetamine and other drugs. About 8% of women now smoke marijuana during their pregnancy. Huge unknown what's going to happen. And we now see that it not only causes growth restriction and prematurity, but we're seeing long-term developmental disorders in children exposed to opioids in utero. This is another problem we have to understand and know how to intervene, because we will have a second wave of long-term disabled children as a result of the current opioid epidemic. I want to highlight some of the things that are going on that you may or may not know, but this is Research America, and I want to really be clear that the NIH has been remarkable in their approach to the opioid outbreak and the opioid epidemic. They have a new initiative called the HEAL initiative, which is really a trans-agency initiative that not only deals with the NIH, but has basically every agency within HHS that's working on it, to improve treatments for opioid misuse and addiction, to enhance pain management, and this goes from the very basic science all the way to community implementation. And it is a very major effort with about $850 million of funding that is going to be delivered throughout fiscal year 19. One thing I will highlight for you that's currently on the streets that I'm extremely excited about, it's one of our 5 cross-cutting initiatives at HHS, is the NIH Healing Communities Initiative. This will put about $100 million a year into 3 communities defined as 15 counties or more, with the absolute goal of reducing overdose mortality by 40% within 3 years. It is an implementation research program that tries to bring everything that the state, the local, the federal governments do, law enforcement and health, labor and housing, all together into an implementation research program. This is going to be awarded probably in the second week in April. There are site visits ongoing now, but this is a very, very exciting approach that the NIH is taking, and I want you to know about it, that the NIH is highly responsive to the needs that we face every single day. And it's not just at the basic level. This is going to have an impact starting immediately on overdose deaths within those communities. I also bring up, you don't think of things like CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, as a research agency, but the Center for Innovation, CMMI, is highly involved here in implementation research. This is a model that they have on the street, maternal opioid misuse model, that has about $65 million in funds to test models of how to reach people, particularly mothers and mother-infant dyads with opioid use disorder or neonatal abstinence, in order to bundle the care and have greater outcomes. Again, something you may not think of as a research initiative, but one I think is very important. And finally, to build on this goal, we are trying to develop a whole network based on the infrastructure so that we've had our first national convening. The First Lady came to that. So we're developing a research infrastructure so that we can track children with neonatal abstinence syndrome throughout their lifetimes and provide the kinds of interventions that they need. So this is just on the ground right now. We're working across agencies to do that. Couple words about HIV, because I want to give you a little potpourri here. We've lost 700,000 people to HIV in America since 1981. And the fact is, we'll have another 400,000 cases over the next 10 years, and there's really no reason that has to be that way. Why is there no reason it has to be that way? Because when I started treating patients with HIV, they lived for 3 months. And then we started having antiretroviral therapy, that pile of pills in the 90s that you had to take several times a day to extend life for a few years. Now we have 7 choices of 1 pill a day that the average life expectancy of a person on treatment is almost normal. It's just at about 70 years. That's absolutely remarkable, and as a result of the research that we have done together. We now know that that single pill can make the viral load undetectable, and if you have an undetectable viral load, you cannot transmit the infection to anyone else. That is a remarkable statement that we're feeling comfortable with. Undetectable means untransmittable. Just think about that. If we could reach everybody who has HIV and put them on therapy, we could stop HIV tomorrow. So our goal is to translate that theoretical possibility into reality. Another triumph of research is PrEP. We have a single pill a day that could prevent transmissions up to 97% of the time. Really remarkable, but yet only 10% or less of people who have it indicated are on PrEP. So our initiative, which was announced by the President and comes with $291 million in new funding in the upcoming year, is to focus on 48 counties and a few jurisdictions that have 50% of the HIV cases. Just think of that. It's that focused and that concentrated. So we can have a public health effort to really work on that. And our model suggests that we can reduce new cases by 75% within 5 years and by 90% within 10 years. And that basically is the initiative that, I've been on the Hill all morning and all this week briefing, because this is doable. There's no miracle that's needed. However, we still need research. And that research comes from the Centers for AIDS Research for the NIH, because we are not going to be as smart as we need to be the day we start this initiative. These are centers funded by NIAID that will be our implementation research guide to make sure that what we're doing continues to grow with our increased knowledge base, and we get better and better every day that we do this. Again, research is out throughout this always. Last couple of slides. My day job is the Assistant Secretary for Health. We believe our job is leading America to healthier lives. Everything we do is based on research. We rolled out new physical activity guidelines for America in November. Remarkable. And this is one of the good things about research. One of the good stories is that you don't need to do physical activity in increments of 10 or 20 minutes. If you get 150 minutes a week of moderate activity, you reduce your risks, all hazard risk, by 70%. So that means if you park a little bit further away and walk, that counts. If you walk up 1 flight of stairs, that counts. So everything we do really depends on the kinds of things that you support. We're an evidence-based organization, and if you don't have the evidence, you need to generate some. And that's what Research America is all about. My last 2 slides, I have a personal passion for sickle cell. I do because I was a pediatric ICU doctor, and I ran a children's health system, and I knew sickle cell backwards and forwards. Also, a young girl that we mentored all of her life, and she's now a young adult. She's sort of been our third daughter, and she has very severe sickle cell disease and is now a national advocate. So we started a pan government initiative to do everything. It's not just research and cures, but it's also about teaching physicians how to care for patients. It's about figuring out how we're going to pay for patients once they have these new cures. How do we get them paid for? Because to me, one worse thing than not having a cure is having a cure and nobody can get to it. And we want to avoid that. And I hope you all saw this on Sunday evening, the 60-minute story of really one of the first few young people who were cured of their sickle cell disease by gene editing technology. And Francis, and I know Dr. Gibbons will say the same thing, we're only a few years away from this being generally available. There's a lot of research that has to be packed into that. There's a lot of implementation research that needs to be packed into that. But this is only the start. There are thousands of genetic diseases that this is laying the trail for. So to me, this is the most exciting time ever in medicine, made possible by the research that you support. And I want to be an ally, an advocate, a collaborator, a cheerleader, whatever I could do to support your organization. And I really appreciate the time. Please keep up with me. Scott Gottlieb and I have had a ongoing competition for followers on Twitter. He's going to lose now. But I'd still like to do that. But please follow me, and hopefully we can keep in touch with each other. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
I think that was a very special opportunity to hear from Admiral Giroir. I hope we can have those slides or subject. Wonderful. Excellent, excellent. I know we can use them. I'm excited about all the positives. Glad to hear about the determination to overcome remaining challenges, and they're big. And to see that research and evidence is such an important part of finding answers to very, very difficult health challenges just makes me feel that we're living in the right time for leadership at our federal agencies working together, NIH, CDC, in the department, FDA. It's exciting, so thank you. Well, the next part of our program is going to be terrific. We're honored to be joined now on the stage by Dr. Susan Hockfield, Professor of Neuroscience and President Emerita at the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Seema Kumar, Vice President of Innovation, Global Health, and Policy Communication at Johnson & Johnson Innovation. You can read their full bios in the program. As you know from my report, Dr. Hockfield will be honored this evening as the Jeffrey Bean Foundation Builders of Science awardee. She will be the first woman to receive this honor. I have known these two. Oh, that's good. Let's clap for that. I have known these two dynamic women leaders for several years, and you're in for a treat. Seema and Susan, we look forward to an engaging discussion on where research was and perhaps where you were 30 years ago, and what exciting visions you have for the next 30. Thank you. Come on up.
Thanks, Mary. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Mary, and hi, good afternoon, everybody. And Mary, congratulations on 30 years of Research America. It's a real testament to your leadership and advocacy for research over the past 30 years. So, 30 years, Susan, a lot can happen in 30 years. And we've seen really a revolution in biology happen in the past 30 years. I think the prior 30 years, maybe it was the golden age of physics, and then we have the golden age of biology. From recombinant DNA all the way to the Human Genome Project and gene editing that we saw, the cure for sickle cell. A lot has happened. What are the standout moments for you?
Well, you know, it's hard to call out just a few because it has been an astonishing 30-year period, just amazing. So if you think about it, the Human Genome Project was launched at the end of the 1980s, 1990, and you know, at the time it cost, what did it cost to sequence that first human genome?
Probably like $17, $18, but Jim did a back of the envelope calculation and said $1 per base pair, right?
Yeah.
So, and he said that's how we are going to determine the budget, $3 billion, you know, over 10 years.
Yeah. So, and now you can sequence a genome in roughly for about $1,000 in about a day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're grinding through these at the rate of tens of thousands to do the kinds of comparisons that we need to understand the basis of disease. It's just, that's amazing.
Amazing, yeah.
The other thing I was just thinking about 30 years ago, you know, anyone who has Hep C can get it cured today. The Hep C virus was identified in the late 80s for the first time. Amazing. The cystic fibrosis gene
Absolutely.
was identified in the late 80s, and now, I don't know, we can cure close to 90% of people with cystic fibrosis.
I know.
Amazing.
Amazing.
I mean,
Totally.
these are impossibilities.
Yeah.
So it's quite, it really is breathtaking.
It is breathtaking, and life has changed, you know, for human beings over the past 30 years. And yet, in your new book, I'll talk a little bit about the book, you argue that the best is still yet to come, and that we should be ready for yet another big revolution of unimaginable proportions that will make our lives even better. So talk a little bit about your book and what you predict will happen in the next 30 years.
Yeah, so when I was president of IT, I was charged with, you know, looking into the future, and, you know, I would always say my crystal ball gets a little foggy 5 years out, and I figured one way to think about the future we're going to be living in is to think about the future we're living in today. And, you know, I don't know how many of you happen to be carrying a mega computer in your pocket or your purse. Everyone. And this digital technology that has transformed our lives, it really was, I would say, the most transformational technology of the 20th century.
Absolutely.
And if you think about how we came to that, we came to that because, among other great discoveries, in 1897, J.J. Thomson described the electron. People thought the atom was the irreducibly smallest piece of the physical world.
Yes.
Well, Thomson discovered the electron.
Exactly.
And, you know, within a couple of decades, that kind of research insight gave rise to an entirely new industry, the electronics industry. There wasn't an electronics industry in 1900.
Yep.
You know, and now we take all of these fabulous electronic gadgets absolutely for granted.
Yep.
So the convergence of this parts list of physics with the brilliance of engineering created the technology story of the 20th century.
Now, well, of course, we had the World Wide Web. Who would have?
My gosh, that's right. So
Yeah.
Sir Tim Berners-Lee, well, not yet Sir,
Yeah.
Tim Berners-Lee described his idea for the World Wide Web about
Yeah.
30 years ago.
Yes.
And now it's, you know, inseparable from
Yes.
our minds, right?
Absolutely.
So, but biology didn't have a parts list, so biology was a little late to the game, or later than physics. But with the revolutions in molecular biology and genomics we were just talking about,
Yeah.
we now have a parts list of the biological world. And we've talked about what that parts list has produced for biomedicine, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But when I first arrived at MIT, I was talking to the dean of the School of Engineering to kind of, you know, get up to speed. And he told me something that just knocked me sideways. He said a third of the faculty, MIT's engineering faculty is kind of big, 390. A third of those 390 engineering faculty were using biology parts in their work.
Yep.
And I immediately said, oh, yeah, biomedicine. He said, no, beyond biomedicine. And I came to discover a host of new technologies emerging out of the 21st century's technology transformation story, the convergence of biology with engineering. And so it was a new story to me, and I have now written a book that's coming out May 7th for general audiences that give people an insight into what this technology transformation is going to look like. The book is called The Age of Living Machines, How Biology Will Build the Next Technology.
That's fascinating because you've turned it around a little bit, you know, because people are always talking about how technology is going to change biology or healthcare, because that's the word on the street. But really the way you've phrased it is like how biology is going to change technology. And of course, you know, one of biology's biggest projects, the Human Genome Project, was done, I mean, one of the leadership sites for it was MIT, an engineering college, and a mathematician was one of the leaders. So it all talks to the convergence of these two fields. So talk a little bit
So the enabling
about,
technology, so
Yeah.
the Human Genome Project would be impossible without the technology that developed in parallel to make it possible. So, so you think about, you know, what might we do with biology parts?
Yeah.
Some of the things that are being done with biology parts sound like science fiction. So one of my colleagues, 2 floors down in the Koch Institute at MIT, is an engineer. And she's working on new ways to diagnose ovarian cancer and cure ovarian cancer, but she's also working on batteries. I got to know her through MIT's Energy Initiative. And, you know, we love alternative energy. Everyone, you know, wants to move to all solar, all wind.
Yeah.
It's fine, but, you know, there are times the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow.
Yeah.
And the rate-limiting technology for alternative energy technologies is energy storage, batteries. And so you can build not to call out any company in particular, you can build a battery plant, you know, a couple acres in size.
Yes. Yeah.
But battery manufacturing today is incredibly energy intensive and has a lot of toxic byproducts. Unsustainable.
Yes.
And what Angie has done, she's used biology with engineering. She's persuaded viruses to organize battery components, and she has viruses building batteries on a laboratory bench at room temperature without generating any toxic byproducts. This could be a solution to our energy needs, to turn all of these alternative energies into something that really is sustainable. You know, one of the things I think we all worry about, obviously, we worry about the stresses on our planet, but we're looking at the very real prediction that we're going to have over 9.7 billion people on the planet by 2050. That's only 2 billion more than we have today. And you know, already today, we don't have sustainable energy solutions. We don't have enough fresh water to, you know, maintain the world, life as we know it today.
Absolutely.
And a little bit like battery technology, water purification technologies are energy intensive and just not that environmentally friendly. So if you think about where does water get purified? Our cells purify water every day using another little example of nature's genius.
Yes.
And Peter Agre discovered the water channel and won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for that discovery. And I recently visited a company outside of Copenhagen that is using the same kind of bioprocessing that we used to make the biopharmaceuticals, but to make these water channel proteins.
Phenomenal.
And then incorporate them into water filters.
Yes.
And the founder of the company told me, he said, you know, why would we bust our brains trying to figure out how to filter water? Let's just use nature's genius. And so that's kind of the theme of the book is, you know, how do we use strategies that nature has used, biological parts, to solve our most pressing technical problems, to create a better world for those 9.7 plus people who will be living on the planet.
Fascinating. And the book is called again?
The Age of Living Machines, How Biology Will Build the Next Technology Revolution.
And we can look for it
May 7th. You can look
7th.
for it on Amazon today.
Amazon today, yes.
You won't actually get a book in hand.
That's great. That's great. Look forward to reading it. It sounds fascinating. Now, at MIT, you were the first female president.
Yes.
So again, using a 30-year time frame. How far have we come as it relates to women in science? Are we there yet? And what will the next 30 years bring, or what should we do? As you said, the future is now. What should we do now to make sure that the next 30 years position women in science to be in a better place?
So we've clearly come a long way, baby, beyond smoking very slender cigarettes that are just as
Virginia Slims,
yeah, just as dangerous in terms of lung cancer as the fat versions.
Yes.
There was, let's just say, some surprise that MIT would appoint a woman as president.
Why?
Well, there hadn't been any, you know.
What
before.
year was it?
1893. No. But I'll tell you, so I, you know, having had the kind of freedom, thank you, my parents, to do anything I wanted to do. I never really noticed that there was an impediment, but it was marvelous when I was introduced to the community. My great friend and colleague, Nancy Hopkins, who led a number of, I would say, probably the most important leader at MIT in terms of changing the conditions for women, being sure the conditions for women are the same as the conditions for men. Was walking over to the auditorium where my appointment was going to be announced. I ran into a young woman colleague and said, "Are you going to come over?" She said, "No, you know, I never wanted to be president of MIT, but now I know I could be." If you can see it, you can be it.
Yes.
Very, very powerful message. So at the time, already, you know, almost half of the MIT undergraduates were women.
Yep.
Faculty lagging a little bit behind. And I think what's important is making it clear that women not just can have all the opportunities that men can have if they work twice as hard, but to send the message that you don't only have to work the same as hard
Yes.
to get to the same
Yes,
place.
yes.
So we're not there yet, and I think the National Academy's study that came out this year was very important in calling out the continued issues for women in science and medicine and engineering. And Rush Holt and AAAS hosted a convening of professional societies to help accelerate the changes that we need to create a level playing field. And Seema, I mean, I know you and I share this view. We have some really hard problems to solve. And why would we use only half of our workforce to solve them?
Absolutely. It just doesn't make sense logically, because if you had a full body, 2 hands, 2 feet, would you walk with just one leg and do things with one hand? No, right?
So we're missing out on a lot of
We're
our
missing out on
a lot of potential,
Yeah.
and I hate squandered resources. And this is
Absolutely.
one area where we continue to squander resources that we could be putting to solving some of our hardest problems.
But obviously, on the positive side, hopefully, I should say, not obviously, hopefully, things changed from the 30 years prior to when you actually became president. So what does that landscape look like? Has it changed enough?
So it's changing, actually. So when I first got to MIT, I sat with my senior leadership team, and I said, we've got some things we've got to change. I said, but it's a 20-year project, so it's going to outlast me. And so I arrived at MIT in 2004, and at the time, MIT had never had a department head in the School of Engineering who was a woman. Right now, half of the departments in the MIT School of Engineering are women.
Excellent.
So it's happening.
Something to celebrate.
And there are young women who see it, and they can be it too. So I think we're moving faster now. We've got to keep, but unfortunately, we've got to keep the pedal to the metal in order to keep the change happening, because there's a lot of backsliding that always happens.
How do we do that? Because I don't know, yes, faculty, but what about students? And what about, because if we want to build a pipeline for the future, we need to work now, not on graduate students or undergraduate students, but even much earlier in the game, probably even middle school or even earlier.
Right.
So what do we need to do to ensure that we have a pipeline?
So our conversation so far has been quite optimistic, and I hate to take a turn toward the less optimistic, but for science to flourish, for research to flourish, it takes experts. It takes expertise. It takes a belief in the pursuit of truth, that things can be adjudicated, that some things are right and some things are wrong. Facts may change, but we're going to do our best to establish where truth lies, or the direction in which truth lies. And one of my big concerns right now for our nation is an erosion of confidence in experts and expertise, an erosion of confidence in facts and the pursuit of truth. And I think if I were to say there are, of course, several things that are necessary for this magic mix that builds a research enterprise that not just makes new discoveries, but turns those new discoveries into new industries and builds our innovation economy. I worry that if, as a nation, we have a sense of pulling back from a belief in the pursuit of truth.
And there seems to be a lack of trust in science in general, and associated with a lack of trust in big institutions, whether it's academia, big institutions, universities, government, industry, everything. But also there is another sort of very insidious force at play. And that's sort of my pet peeve, as you know, Susan, which is that the image of science. The image of science continues to be one that is, hugely stereotyped. So it's either the mad scientist who's going to destroy the world, or it's a nerd who doesn't belong. And I love, James Bond movies, but typically James Bond is this debonair, phenomenal hero who's saving the world. And poor Q is in the back, making up, in his lab coat with all his frizzy hair, trying to make some device. So why do we not make science front and center, the star of the show? Do we need more science celebrities? Do we need to change the image in the media?
That would help. However, I think that one of the things that really does help is in our schools. One of the every time I meet a 5-year-old, he's an engineer, right? They've invented something. They bring you the saltine that's really a truck, or,
Yes.
and they've solved some problem, in some magical way. But, but that's really, they're understanding that science allows them to do new things, and it's very exciting. So being sure that that's embedded in kids' experiences, I think, is really important. And that it basically the message, you can do it. It doesn't, you don't have to be, so adept that you will be a rocket scientist, although I know a lot of women rocket scientists. But I think this whole idea of enthusiasm and the sense that the future will be the future we create. And that's everyone's responsibility and everyone's opportunity.
Absolutely.
And it's, it's an exciting place to be. And I think creating opportunities where our kids can feel the excitement and understand that they can love something and do it, and not just satisfy their own desire, but also at the same time help others.
You talked about being able to see yourself in the position. That's important. Mm-hmm. Storytelling and the narrative is also important, which is why the movie Hidden Figures had such a huge impact, and same thing with Black Panther, right? And so storytelling also becomes a big portion. What is the narrative we're telling people? Mm-hmm. You also said future is now. So we have to imagine the future that we are going to create, right? And you talked about science fiction, because some of the best ideas, as I say, is think of yourself as a science fiction writer and then imagine what it would be. Given all of that, it seems like we stand at a real inflection point today as it relates to science. In your mind, what do we need to do now to secure our future for the next 30 years?
So I don't possess the capacity to know where we will be in 30 years, and I think very few people do, and I'm not a futurist. But we have to build the foundation for that future, and that foundation comes from a lot of just searching and seeking and trying things out, and the technologies of today are built on research discoveries that no one knew were going to turn into anything. J.J. Thomson, when he discovered the electron, was not thinking about my iWatch, trust me. And similarly for the great discoveries in biology. So we have to be sure that we're funding, the foundational steps, and beyond that, creating the opportunities for people to cross boundaries. One of my big themes, and it's because I had the great good fortune of doing my research for my dissertation in a multidisciplinary lab at the NIH, and I saw the magic of people coming together across disciplines. I also saw the struggle and the language barriers and what it takes to cross the language barriers, but this was a group that was focused on pain. Just heard about the importance of understanding the fundamental nature of pain and how to fix it. And so that kind of has become just my base understanding of how things get done. So creating opportunities where people can gather together around a problem, around a mission, around an ambition, and bring to the solution their perspectives from a number of different points of view, because we don't know, where the truth lies. We don't know where we're going to discover the little jewel that will hold the key for turning things around in terms of producing the kind of amount of food we need for our growing population, the clean water we need, the medical advances that we need to improve lives. And so we just have to continue to fund these, shall we call them playgrounds of the mind, that allow people to make visible what is currently invisible.
Absolutely. So as you think of it, first of all, congratulations on the award you're about to receive this evening.
Thank you.
And once again, first female to receive the award. As you think about your career, what are some of the things that you're most proud of?
Well, it was, I was called to do science, and that was gave me great joy, and I had the privilege of discovering some things that had been invisible before, making them visible. But for me, the most important times in my career, the most important events, have been when I facilitated the creation of communities that allow people to, again, come together across disciplines to attack a problem in a new way. When I first arrived at MIT, and I asked people what our responsibilities and opportunities were over the next decade, there was just a lot of discomfort that we were not contributing enough to an energy solution for the world. And when I say I I mean, they. I mean, this
They,
has nothing
yeah.
to do with. It has very little to do with me, except to say, we can do this,
Yes.
and to bring people together to create some new solutions in the energy domain, and to help advance this convergence theme. I think is going to be incredibly important. I imagine that 30 years from now, when I pick up, the microphone guts, these microphone guts will have been built through some biological phenomenon and not engineered out of silicon. So we will see.
Yep.
But I think creating opportunities for particularly young people to cross disciplines and become the bilingual people we're going to need
Yes.
to invent that future, I think is going to be really important.
So you believe that this sort of coming together, not only of disciplines, but of people of diverse backgrounds, is going to create that spark. And so why is that so important, that sort of convergence? Because you've been a big champion of convergence so far. Yeah.
So the problem is searching for the new.
Yeah.
And we are educated in disciplines. I think that's very important. And progress is made in disciplines. But really, new ideas, really new perspectives invariably come out of picking up a new tool, a new technology, and applying it in a way that it wasn't invented for. And it is the surprising insights. And I just deeply believe, and I've seen, that there are more surprising insights when you put surprising groups of people together.
Excellent. It's like the African proverb, in which you say, if you want to walk fast, go alone. If you want to reach far, go farther, go together.
That's so great. I got to know Secretary Schultz while I was president. One of the great joys of being president is you meet amazing people. And he has a lovely saying. He says, if you want to land together, you better take off together. A proverb from the West and a proverb
from
Africa. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So on that note, let me ask you for closing thoughts and inspirational words. Maybe less for the audience gathered here, because we're kind of, all of us, preaching to the choir, right? What's the message for those who we want to fall in love with science again, and for the youth, the youngsters, for the future?
It's interesting. One of the things that I hear a lot about, from people who are just kind of grab science is, how do you get excited about this? Say, well, I took something apart. So one of the hard things about now is that if you take this apart, it doesn't really tell you much.
Yeah.
When I took apart my mother's vacuum cleaner, I learned a lot about it. I didn't manage to
Washing
reassemble it. No, actually, I don't know how my parents managed to not be mad as I disassembled various objects around the house. But I think this idea of just of doing it,
Yes.
building it, and creating opportunities for people to create things in many domains, not just in science. And the other thing, I have to tell you, one of the things that I just find infinitely inspiring is medicine is a tough pursuit. It's a really tough pursuit. And we think about the position of doctors. When I was growing up in our communities, they were the be-all and end-all. And not everyone, but kind of every other one wanted to be a doctor because of course, the amount you could help and the position in the community. And even though that has eroded, I can't tell you, it amazes me. Young people today still want to be doctors. They still want to go to medicine. So I think calling on our better angels and encouraging our young people that, you can do good and you can do well.
Yes.
And it is a marvelous pursuit to serve others in these ways that include the discovery of the world around you. And finding your place in a community of discoverers and helpers.
Wonderful. On that note, thank you, Susan,
Thank you,
very
Seema.
much. That's great. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you again very much, Seema and Susan, for the insightful dialogue. It was absolutely terrific. It's invaluable to hear your thoughts on how far we've come in the last 30 years, and I'm especially energized by the excitement at the opportunity to do so much more. Tonight, Research America will honor and salute the work of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation by presenting the foundation with the Paul G. Rogers Distinguished Organization Advocacy Award. Advances in cystic fibrosis and research are in part the result of tireless work by advocates like our next speaker, advocates who have raised awareness and funds that have fueled new discoveries, improved lives, and created hope for the future. It is my pleasure now to introduce Melissa Shiffman to share her personal experience with cystic fibrosis. Melissa was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at the age of 5. She's been a longstanding volunteer and a devoted advocate for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation for many years, most recently serving as the National Advocacy Co-Chair for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation until 2018. As a clinically active pulmonologist and former ICU director, I've seen the field of CF make heartening strides. But as we will hear from Melissa, sometimes those incremental improvements do not come soon enough. Melissa, I look forward to hearing from you about the power of research and advocacy. Please now welcome Melissa Shiffman. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for welcoming me to celebrate this monumental occasion with you. 30 years of Research America's mission to ensure that health and medical research is a national priority. That's something to be immensely proud of. I'm a beneficiary of dedicated research. I have a rare disease called cystic fibrosis. For those of you who are not aware, cystic fibrosis is a rare genetic disease that affects the respiratory, digestive, and pancreatic systems. It affects 30,000 Americans. Due to a defective gene, thick, sticky mucus builds up and clogs the lungs and pancreas, trapping bacteria, leading to recurring infection, inflammation, malnutrition, and eventually causes respiratory failure. Currently, there is no cure. If you want a sense of what it feels like to have CF, I have an exercise for you. Next time you find yourself with a cocktail straw, maybe later this evening, put it in your mouth, hold your nose, and breathe for 10 seconds, and you'll get a sense of that. Cystic fibrosis is an invisible disease. While some people wear oxygen, most people look just like me. You wouldn't necessarily think that I had a disability. But what you don't see is what I need to do in order to make myself get through each day. In order to clear mucus from my lungs twice a day, an hour at a time, I wear a vibrating airway clearance vest that shakes up my lungs to dislodge the mucus, enable for me to cough it out. I take 3 nebulized medications to open up my airways, lubricate them, and thin the mucus. I take an inhaled antibiotic 3 times a day. I also take a minimum of 19 pills and saline and nasal steroid sprays to stave off sinus infection. I'm lucky to be pancreatic sufficient. For those who are not, they need to take enzymes anytime they put food in their mouth in order to absorb the nutrients. Exercise is also very important to keep the lungs healthy, so I try to fit that in. I also can't be in the room with another person who has cystic fibrosis because we can't risk cross-infection. It's an isolating disease that takes its toll mentally and physically. 30 years holds a lot of significance in my family. It was 30 years ago that my only brother, Jason, passed away from cystic fibrosis. Jason and I were both diagnosed in 1978. He had a much more severe case than I had. He was pancreatic insufficient and was in the hospital for IV antibiotics at least 4 times a year with lung infections. He had pulmonary therapists come over daily to give him his airway clearance. At the time, I was relatively healthy, faking my way through airway clearance, but I suffered from chronic nasal polyps. I've had 13 nasal polyp surgeries, so I usually join my brother at least once a year in the hospital for surgery and to race IV poles down the hallway. Unfortunately, he grew sicker every year, and though my parents were told his lifespan would be 12 years, he lived to 16. We have the same genetic mutations, but here I stand today. It is so hard to reconcile that Jason did not live long enough to benefit from the incredible research that so many have since his death. Back then, we didn't have the same medical treatments as part of our daily regimen that we do today. In 1989, the year after he died, the gene for cystic fibrosis was discovered. I remember everyone hoping a cure was right around the corner. It wasn't, but it did open the door to newer and better drug treatments that extended lives for many people with cystic fibrosis. In fact, today, adults now outnumber children with the disease. Because of these treatments, I was able to accomplish the same things as my peers. I graduated high school, went to college, graduate school, and started a career in the music industry. I spent my 20s traveling for work, having late nights at the office. I met and married an amazing guy and decided to change careers. I got a degree in social work and absolutely loved working with disadvantaged teens on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I had always dreamed of having a family, so I worked very hard to build up my health. I became the most compliant patient that ever lived, and I gave birth to 2 beautiful children at a time when very few women with CF were having kids. It seemed like I had it all. However, CF is a degenerative disease. My lung function declined, and I developed debilitating stomach symptoms through stress. My doctor and I decided that I was no longer able to work full-time. Taking care of my health became my full-time job. And I understood this intellectually, but for an overachieving New Yorker with a lot of anxious energy, it was really hard. I'd always volunteered for CF organizations, so I contacted my local chapter and became active in our annual Great Strides Walk, and volunteered for other events when I could. I developed a relationship with the executive director, and one day she called me and said that the foundation had an advocacy program and was looking for representatives from each state to meet and talk with elected officials about cystic fibrosis and policies that are important to the community. I'd become very interested in policy while at social work school, but I never contacted my representatives before. The closest I came was chasing Senator Ted Kennedy down Fifth Avenue after a lecture he gave. I didn't catch him. The thought scared me, but I was also at a point where I was really down about not being able to work. My kids were both in school full-time. I knew I should feel grateful just to be alive at 37, but I was overcome by feelings of worthlessness. I said yes, and I have not looked back. I came to DC for my first Advocacy Day, the annual March on the Hill campaign. I had 0 expectations, but a million butterflies. That year, we were going to legislators' offices to spread awareness of cystic fibrosis by sharing our stories, what CF was, what it looks like to live with the disease, and to share the CF Foundation's mission, which is to cure cystic fibrosis and to provide all people with the disease the opportunity to live full, productive lives, and to advocate for more funding for NIH and the FDA. While the CF Foundation does not receive funds for NIH, they work collaboratively and benefit from its basic research. The FDA needs resources to swiftly review and approve CF drugs, making sure they are safe and effective. That first day on the Hill was a long, emotional day. I think we held 6 meetings, and I was drained from sharing such personal details about my life. But I never felt more energized. I felt so empowered going to both my senator's office, my congresswoman, and other New York representatives to educate them about the needs of the CF community so that they can make informed decisions about CF-related research, policies, and access to care. I continued building relationships with these offices. I visited offices in district throughout the greater New York area and traveled to DC each year for March on the Hill and Teen Advocacy Day. My 11 and 14-year-olds will be joining this program very soon. With each year, there were different legislative priorities for cystic fibrosis, though funding for NIH and FDA were always of the utmost importance. I'm not going to run through all the priorities, but there are some that I do want to highlight. The Expert Act, which brought rare disease expert voices to the FDA drug approval process, ensuring the FDA has the most complete information in order to expedite critically needed drugs safely and effectively. Kalydeco, which is the first drug to address the underlying cause of cystic fibrosis, passed through the FDA in a record 72 days because of expertise from the foundation and its partners. The Ensuring Access to Clinical Trials Act made permanent a law that benefited me personally right in the nick of time. When a disease only has 30,000 people nationwide, it's imperative that every person participate in clinical research if possible. However, because many people with CF end up on disability, receiving compensation for a clinical trial compromised their income eligibility for SSDI and Medicaid. I was just about to start a clinical trial for what is now known as the drug Symdeko. but as someone on disability, I could not risk losing my benefits. We spent months advocating for EAC to remove barriers for patients to take part in clinical trials. President Obama signed it into law October of 2015. I began my clinical trial in November. We also began advocating on the state level. New York has had 3 advocacy days where a group of us meet in Albany to advocate for state policies, such as issues relating to Medicaid, threatened budget cuts to a CF-specific adult assistance program, and access to care and treatments for a very costly disease. In 2015, I became the National Advocacy Co-Chair for the CF Foundation, and with my partner, tried to build upon our extremely engaged network of advocates through social media. 2017 became a very challenging time for the CF community as we were hit with multiple repeals of the Affordable Care Act and the protections it provided for people with rare diseases, such as pre-existing conditions, lifetime and annual caps, and essential health benefits. I'm old enough to remember the anxiety of making sure my coverage didn't lapse, or worrying that a new treatment would cost so much money that I would hit my annual cap within months. Our message was that all patients need health care that was available, adequate, and affordable. What good are these decades of research if patients can't access the results? Thankfully, the repeals did not take place in the Senate. A grandmother of a child with cystic fibrosis caught up with Senator Susan Collins at a 4th of July parade and marched alongside her, detailing the importance of her grandchild having access to the robust pipeline of CF interventions. The senator voted no. That's democracy. That's advocacy at our best, and democracy. Unfortunately, access to care is still being threatened through the removal of protections in the tax bill, the expansion of short-term insurance plans, continued threats of the ACA repeal, and the release of this week's budget proposal. I will not stop while lives are at stake. I would say it's nothing short of a miracle that I'm standing here today, but the truth is, I'm standing here thanks to a perfect storm of grassroots families in the 1950s who came together to fund research on cystic fibrosis, to the incredible CF care centers who pour their hearts and expertise into our families and conduct clinical trials, to the brilliant scientists who discovered the CF gene in 1989, and those following over the past 30 years who have incrementally extended our lives with groundbreaking treatments, and who continue to do so until that glorious day when a cure is found. To the innovative work of the CF Foundation, who not only partners with these scientists to fund research as they search for a cure, but who devote their days advocating for us and with us on healthcare policy so that our elected officials understand that there are real people and real-life implications attached to their decisions. I'm also here thanks to my kindred CF community who work tirelessly on all fronts so that none of us will succumb to this disease anymore. And of course, my family, who motivate me to stay on track when I'm too tired to do a treatment or just want to feel normal. We proudly talk about this cystic fibrosis being the best story in medicine. Families who share a rare disease start a grassroots fundraising and within decades develops the most exciting drug pipeline, attacking the disease from many angles, prolonging and improving patients' lives. Within the next year, we will have treatments that benefit 95% of people with CF, but they're not done until 100% of us have a cure. On behalf of families affected by cystic fibrosis, thank you so much to Research America for your commitment to making medical research a national priority. Thank you.
Melissa, thank you so very much for sharing your story and for your advocacy, I might add. When I was in Congress and I see people like you coming, I'd sometimes duck because I know how good you are. But you deserve a lot of credit for all that you have done, and we wish you many, many more years, decades of good life. I am now honored to introduce Dr. Gary Gibbons, who's the director of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute at the National Institutes of Health, NIH, as we know it. Dr. Gibbons oversees the third largest institute at the NIH with an annual budget of more than $3 billion. Before joining the NHLBI, Dr. Gibbons served as the founding director of the Cardiovascular Research Institute, chairperson of the Department of Physiology, and professor of physiology and medicine at the Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta. As you know, this evening we will be honoring the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, as has already been mentioned, and the tremendous progress made through tireless advocacy by CF patients like Melissa, and dedication of legions of scientists and clinicians supported by NHLBI. It is therefore fitting to have Dr. Gibbons with us to share the outlook on advancements in cystic fibrosis research and care. And with that, Dr. Gibbons. Good luck following her.
Great. I appreciate that introduction, and he actually whispered an admonition, good luck following Melissa. It's really a privilege of public service that I have this position, and I indeed have been engaged in these sort of events before, where we have the patient voice as part of it, and I must say it's always an inspiration to me. It keeps us grounded and focused on why we do what we do. Certainly as a clinician scientist, indeed that's the motivation for why I took this position. So I as difficult a challenge is to follow such an inspirational sharing of a narrative, I find that this is really keeps us focused on why we're here as a collective partnership. And why we need your support and advocacy in doing so. So it's in that same spirit that I bring our congratulatory note to Mary and Research America on your 30th anniversary. I'm privileged to be the director of an institute that just last year celebrated its 70th anniversary. As many of you know, the National Heart Institute was amongst the early ones of the first institutes at NIH. And so much of our longevity relates to folks like you that have advocated for us. And I also thought it appropriate to show the fruits of your labor and your advocacy. I joined in 2012. And so Washington, D.C., in a wonderful, warm way that this city works, welcomed me into this position of public service by having a shutdown and sequestration within my first year. So that dip in the curve reflects that. But I am appreciative of the other element of it, and that is that it is an opportunity for us to come together as a community and in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way, see what's best for our country and the importance of investing in biomedical research as perhaps one of the best returns and investments of taxpayer dollars we can have. And so we're appreciative of the increase that's related to your advocacy, and we again come with great appreciation for the work that you do on behalf not of the Institute, but on what we're doing for our country. This has enabled us to begin to shape a strategic vision and a set of research priorities that are guiding the NHLBI over the next 5 to 10 years. We've been engaged in a very inclusive process that's been inclusive of a very diverse community. Literally, we engaged in a crowdsourcing effort that involved inputs from every state in this country, actually 42 countries around the world that have contributed to this roadmap in which we were going to pursue. And that's what's enabled us to take that increase and again invest it all over the country to pursue our mission, to turn discovery science into the health of the nation, so it has an impact on every community in our nation. And a critical part I'll just highlight here is that turn of the curve was really critical. It came at a juncture when the success rates for young investigators trying to get their foothold, their first step on a career, was plunging down to 1 out of 15 chance or 1 out of a 10 chance of being successful in getting awarded an NIH grant. That's incredibly discouraging for a whole generation. In fact, if we'd continued that trend, very likely we would have lost an entire generation of scientists. Bending that curve is critical. And so now I can report, as a result of that increase, we've increased by at least 50% the number of early stage investigators the NHLBI has been able to produce each year because of that advocacy. So you're having an impact, and an impact that will indeed last a generation of discovery. Let me just quickly highlight 3 areas. As a parent, I have 3 children, and it's hard to say who's my favorite, and I can't have a favorite. So of our vast portfolio, I thought I'd just give 3 highlights of 3 areas that ecumenically have heart, lung, and blood as part of our institute. One of those areas really is an extension really of our 70-year legacy. That the National Heart Institute part of us was started at the zenith of the epidemic in heart disease that had come after infectious disease. It started as the major cause of death in the 20th century, but it had been switched over to coronary heart disease by the middle of that century, and that's where we started iconic programs like the Framingham Heart Study. It's that research that gave us insights into the drivers and eventually the prevention of heart disease that has resulted in that 70% reduction of the #1 killer of Americans. Both men and women, I should say. Also notable that, yes, in 1948, that study was inclusive of both men and women, 50-50. And it gave us insights not only to the natural history of the disease in men, but also women that, again, we still leverage today. That legacy of diversity and inclusion is critically important now, because what we recognize, although we made great progress, it's starting to plateau. Indeed, Admiral Giroir indicated there are certain communities that are probably going in the wrong direction. So a lot of these advances and the fruits of all that investment aren't being appreciated and garnered by every community in this country. There are dramatic disparities in health, in cardiovascular health in particular, that still persist. And that's what's actually shown on that middle map. You'll notice that those red areas are areas that are particularly have an adverse outcome related to cardiovascular disease. Notably, they kind of follow that Ohio River Valley of West Virginia, Kentucky, down to Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and a lot of the Southeast, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. Those are the areas that are particularly hard hit by both heart disease and, as it turns out, chronic lung disease. That's telling us something about geographic health disparities and the communities greatest at risk of this disease. And indeed, it's probably telling us something about what determines health, and in particular, some of the social determinants of health. I was intrigued by your honoring Dr. David Williams, and he's actually been a major leader in helping us to elucidate what is the basis of these health disparities, and appreciating that access to even a healthy lifestyle, being able to find fruits and vegetables in your neighborhood or places to walk, may have an impact on this. And so this is really a key area for us, is to try to see how can we use implementation research and other science of delivery to really foment innovation in ways that can really get the fruits of the biomedical revolution into all these communities to have impact in the real world. Admiral Giroir also alluded to a number of the initiatives that are up in terms of HIV prevention and affecting the opioid epidemic. And what is perhaps startling to some, but maybe not so much to others, is that if you superimpose a lot of those maps of obesity, diabetes, lung disease, heart disease, and indeed the opioid epidemic and new HIV infections, we're starting to identify high-risk communities in which we're appreciating how much where you live and work and play starts to influence your health. And a lot of the communities that have negative outcomes in one sphere also have it in another. And perhaps that's starting to identify a research agenda and a public health agenda that can take a multi-level approach to not only help an individual's health, but a community's health. I think that's one of the major agenda areas for the next 5 years as we try to have an evidence-based elimination of health inequities in this country. Let me also shift from that, those common diseases of heart disease and lung disease that are part of our portfolio to at least give a vignette related to my predecessor on this dais in a rare disease. And sometimes I struggle with that term rare disease because if you look at the collective portfolio of all the rare diseases in our NHLBI as well as NIH, we're actually talking about tens of millions of Americans collectively that are influenced by these so-called rare diseases, many of which we still don't know the etiologic basis of which. As was mentioned by Melissa, for cystic fibrosis, we've come to understand its molecular basis in the CFTR channel and transporter. And that has started to, related to biomedical research, understand how does that defective protein in moving sorts of all kind of chemicals and ions back and forth translate into the kind of lung disease and pancreatic disorders that she described. And more importantly, how can we have a research program that can develop new therapeutics that can restore patients like her to a more normal life? And that's still a key part of our portfolio. But as she mentioned, this is an opportunity where we can come together as, again, a collective community of partners. And it is a great exemplar how citizen science and patient advocates and patients being at the center can be critical drivers of that research agenda and critical enablers of that. It's critical elements and participants in the trials and the discovery. And so we're very excited about the advances that are being made in this realm. Now there's actually a paper that's under embargo that I can't speak about in detail, but again, just this week there exciting research being done that we're funding that is exploring maybe not yet how we can correct the gene and correct the abnormal protein that is part of transporting these ions, but how we can take new molecules that almost act like molecular prosthetics, if you will. So you have that disabled protein, but can we bolster it up by giving a small molecule and help restore that normal function that allows a normal lung behavior again? And so we're excited about the promise and the threshold of a whole new generation of therapeutics that may be able to, again, restore biology until we can get the therapies that can actually correct the genetic defect. So indeed, I think there's, again, an area and a horizon of hope in this. And again, we're actively involved in making that research happen. I'll close with the final example that relates to sickle cell disease. Again, a rare disorder caused by a change in the genetic code that affects the hemoglobin protein, the proteins whose job it is to carry oxygen around to every tissue in the body. And as a result of two abnormal copies of that, that is impaired to the point where the red cell goes from kind of a frisbee that's able to smoothly glide through the blood or to one where it takes a sickle shape and gets stuck in the arteries and can impair a tissue's ability to get oxygen and can indeed cause a stroke. In fact, one of the sobering facts is that a little child of 2 to 3 years old, there's a 1 in 5 chance that they already have a scar in their brain of a silent stroke. So when you think about a 5-year-old or a 2-year-old that already is at risk of a stroke, that's a devastating sort of set of circumstances to start your life. And that's what we're trying to address, is to have a stroke-free generation of children born with sickle cell disease. This is a disorder that affects every race and ethnic group around the world. And yet, and hundreds of thousands of these babies are born in sub-Saharan Africa. Millions exist around the world. So even though it has a rare disease. It has enormous impact and implications. We've made certain advances, again, like cystic fibrosis. It used to be a sentence where you didn't think that child would make it to adulthood. But again, advances have been made to many are living into middle age now. But we can do better. And indeed, patients appropriately are asking that they want normal lives. And that takes something transformational. And that's where we're excited, is that now we have the opportunity to actually, for this disorder, to go in and use new genetic engineering and cellular engineering technologies to actually correct the problem at a molecular level. Now, again, because this is Research America, I'll take a quick aside as to how we're here. We have 3 strategies working that we're actively testing right now. One is to add a copy of a normal hemoglobin alongside the mutated copy. And we're doing that using a virus to get inside, like a Trojan horse, to then generate enough copies of normal hemoglobin that the person is better. So that's one, gene addition. The other is gene correction. That's one where we now go in with new technologies of gene editing, and they're molecular scissors that then can go in and, almost like a word processor, cut out the wrong spelling of the gene that creates the mutated protein, and then indeed insert in the right letter and the right code to create the right hemoglobin. Those technologies came from sort of strange places. They weren't designed to cure sickle cell. The virus that's being used is actually a cousin of the virus that causes HIV/AIDS. It's a certain kind of lentivirus, and what we've learned is that virus is really good at getting into the genome and producing things and staying there. That's what makes it a tough disease in AIDS. But how could we re-engineer that virus to now be producing a lifelong product? And that's the technology that's been used so effectively. The second lesson there is the gene editing technology. This, again, was not an earmarked research initiative for sickle cell. The technology and science that came from that was because you had investigators studying the sort of the defense and immune system of bacteria. And so this is how bacteria fended themselves off from foreign DNA invaders of the bacteria. And they'd have these molecular scissors that would destroy the enemy. So this is 2 great examples of where the cross-pollination of science that's often serendipitous and unpredictable, a discovery over here 20 years ago, turns out to be the cure in another discovery over here 20 years later. And that's why we have to have an investment strategy that, again, floats thousands of boats, lots of ideas, produces fundamental discovery, allowing folks to follow their nose, because we don't know exactly how that's going to translate to a disease and cure here. And so I hope, as part of our advocacy, we're taking that broad perspective and being thoughtful about the earmarking of science, if you will, because, again, we don't always know how to predict where that science and that impact's going to be. Both of those technologies, we think, are going to produce a cure for sickle cell disease within the next 3 to 5 years. And hopefully many of you saw the 60 Minutes piece earlier this week, in which it profiled a special young woman, Janelle, and her struggle with this disease. And she talked about its impact on her life. She talked about the painful crises, and she described it extremely well. I know I have experienced that clinically in patients who I've cared for over my career. And one individual explained it particularly well, who had sickle cell disease. Turns out he's a surgeon. And he's explaining to me what a painful crisis means. He said, Gary, I've had, and this is a surgeon, you know how tough surgeons are. I've had a broken arm, and I've had a sickle cell crisis. And if I had a choice, I'd rather have you break my arm than for me to have a crisis tomorrow or next week. and yet you know that a crisis is coming. You don't know when you wake up in the morning whether this is the day or not, but you know it's coming. What a way to live. What a way to live. And yet we have the ability, I think, to transform that life in the next 3 to 5 years with these sorts of therapies. And if you saw that piece, and you saw a woman who in one moment could be rocked with pain and unable to do anything, to now taking karate lessons and falling on the floor and being able to get up with a smile. That's what we want to have as part of the future and vision for patients with sickle cell. She also described the sense of marginalization that this particular patient population has suffered for many decades. They felt as though they were in the back of the bus in medicine, a marginalized community, a suspect community when they came into emergency rooms. I believe we have an opportunity to put them at the front of the line as we learn how to do these sort of curative therapies. We believe they are the forerunners. And now they're on prime time, literally, because we believe that this is amongst a generation of cures for rare diseases that they're going to be able to make possible because of their courage and their beneficence. And so we appreciate your support as part of our circle of partners. Martin Luther King used to talk about a beloved community in which we're stewards of a public good in terms of this new knowledge, this discovery, and this co-investment in the future to transform lives. And so we appreciate everything you do that enables us to serve and make a difference for patients, with patients at the center. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gibbons, for your expertise and your leadership in these fields. We appreciate that a great deal. And let me, at this time, thank all the others who spoke here today, who contributed so much to our knowledge about what needs to be done perhaps next, or what has been done, and where we're going and why Research America exists. And let me thank all those on the staff who helped put this together. And let me thank all of you for being here. Your support in terms of dealing with medical research and scientific research in general is of vital importance to the future of our country, as we have heard here today. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today, too. And I look forward to seeing most of you, if not all of you, this evening at the dinner. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.